Hello to listeners of Dead Ideas and Eastern Border, because this is going on both our shows in our first ever crossover episode. I'm BT Newberg, and I am joined today by Kristaps.
Greetings, comrades, and do not listen to what this strange foreigner tells you. It's actually a crossover between the Eastern Border and the Dead Ideas, obviously.
No,
but we're here.
That's
we're here
propaganda.
What else did you expect? No, seriously, we're here just. I'll let you a spoiler if you haven't listened to the Ideas yet. Brandon has Slovenian roots, just like your first lady. And he's making this great series about Tito and Yugoslavia. He's fixing up the holes in my own education in this one, because I haven't really paid that much attention to it. And it's going to be a great show, because this fits in my Stalin series perfectly. So, Brandon, explain to our comrades, what are we bringing to them today?
What we're bringing you today is the Tito-Stalin split. And for those of you who might be wondering, who haven't been following either of our shows, you might be wondering, who's Tito Stalin, and can he show me how to do the Tito-Stalin split? But
I'm pretty sure either of them can show you how to do a split. Not in the way that you would imagine a split would look like, but... or would enjoy it for that matter, but... Oh my god, Stalin... How would a Stalin split look
I don't know.
Or a Tito split?
I don't know. But it is not some hot new dance. We're talking about two communist dictators, Stalin, of course, the Stalin, and Tito, the dictator of the former Yugoslavia, who in the early Cold War went head-to-head with Stalin, grudge match style. So that's what we're talking about today on Dead Ideas and Eastern Border.
Of course, comrades, and I understand that my task here is to prove that Stalin is best, and Tito is just some sort of upstart or something. But we shall let you discuss and think the true state of this being, although obviously Stalin wins.
Obviously. We'll find out. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody, and thank you, Kristaps, for doing this with me.
It's okay. It's not like I have anything better to do. My wife's away for like 3 weeks, and what do? I podcast.
And she came back as we were recording.
She came back for a day. A day!
Well, thank you again. Like Kristaps said, I've been doing a series on Titoism on Dead Ideas, and Kristaps is doing a series on Stalin right now, so the match seemed perfect. Today we're covering the conflict between Tito and Stalin that resulted in Yugoslavia's expulsion from the Kominform, which is basically kind of like being excommunicated from the Church of Communism, I guess, to make an analogy. And so we're taking sides, basically. I will take the side of Tito, and Kristaps will take the side of Stalin, and we're going to go head-to-head like some kind of heavyweight boxing match. We're going to do 3 rounds in the ring, covering 3 historical periods of Tito and Stalin's relationship, and the last man standing wins. Now, for those listeners who
by the way, it's Tito versus Stalin. Whomever wins, we all lose.
Okay, very good. Yes. Good point. Now, for those listeners who are new to our shows, as you can already tell, we use a hefty dose of humor, but the point is it's basically the humor is a way into the history, right? So we take on quite serious subjects at times, and both of the guys that we're talking about today were dictators, and we're quite brutal at that. But despite the tragedy, I mean, you got to laugh too. You know, it's kind of like that TV show MASH. Did you ever see that show, Kristaps, MASH?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
it's kind of the same thing because, I should sort of remind you all that Soviets were extremely proud of their political jokes, which were basically, look at us, everything's terrible. But this is sort of a weird way of coping with the stuff.
Exactly. And so MASH was kind of like that, too, because it was about Americans in the Korean War, and it was mostly a comedy, but every once in a while they would do a serious episode. And the juxtaposition of the comedy and the seriousness would just bring out kind of that poignancy all the more. So today we're basically doing a a kind of black humor show that highlights the tensions in what we're talking about when we talk about two dictators. And we're even doing a little black humor contest about that over at Dead Ideas, which we will mention at the end of the episode. I'll tell you a little bit later about that. But yeah, today is going to be a little more on the comedic side, but the tragedy is just beneath the surface,
By the way,
and that's intentional.
And there's a Soviet joke about Tito. What? You expected me not to prepare a political anecdote for this? So basically one of these is like, Khrushchev goes to Yugoslavia to like make peace and everything, and he's welcomed there, and everything is nice, but he kind of drives past the fields of Yugoslavia and doesn't see any posters of his own and stuff, and he leaves and he thinks, well, I should do better, and then Tito comes back with kind of in a return visit, but Khrushchev is prepared. So when Tito just drives past the kolkhoz, Khrushchev has put a poster there, huge poster, and he was like, how would I greet him? He's not exactly in the Communist Party. We kind of have to make up for him. I'll just be honest. So Tito just drives past the kolkhoz, and what he sees is a huge poster saying, "Long live the Tito's clique."
Okay. just like Tito has his own little table in the lunchroom cafeteria at junior high or something, huh?
Approximately, but yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard. There are way more jokes about Khrushchev than Tito available because at least Tito was competent a bit.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, all right. I think enough introduction. Let's
cut this part to shreds if you want to. I'm just, having... I refuse to record an episode if I'm not having fun recording.
No, you gotta laugh at the tragedy. That's what we said. This is staying in. All right, so without further ado, let's meet our fighters. In this corner, our reigning champion, weighing in at 162 pounds or 73.5 kilograms, straight from the mountains of Georgia. That would be Soviet Georgia, not U.S. Georgia. General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact warrior, leader of the communist world, and the man with the iron mustache. His name literally means man of steel, Joseph Stalin. Yeah.
Wow.
And in the other corner, our challenger, the underdog, weighing in at I don't know how many pounds because I couldn't find it on the internet, hailing from the village of Kumrovic in Croatia, from mixed Croatian and Slovenian parentage, president of Yugoslavia, hero of the War of Liberation from the Hitlerites, former communist spy turned defier of domination by Moscow. His name was his final alias from his days as a spy, and he just decided to keep it. Josip Broz Tito.
I do have to say that Stalin was also just a name he decided to keep.
It's
kind of interesting because and it's kind of weird because it doesn't really ring that way in English, but in Russian, like there's Stalin, there's Molotov, and there's Kamenev, which were like big heroes of the revolution. Mm-hmm. And Kamenev is a nickname meaning the stone one. Molotov means the hammer. Okay, So at that point it was kind of cool to pick like proletariat-sounding nicknames.
Nice.
You're not a cool revolutionary. To join the real men's club, you have to pick an industry-sounding name.
Oh, so Man of Steel is like a steel worker then,
or something of that sort. Yeah.
Yeah, but also
still,
steel nerves and all that kind of thing too.
I guess so. Well, Stalin himself preferred Koba in the early life.
Yeah,
Koba was his nickname chosen after Koba the Father Killer, which is interesting because Stalin almost killed his own dad at the age of 7 by throwing a knife at him after his dad went in a drunken rage. But yeah, he picked Koba because Koba was a Georgian folk hero from a novel where he was essentially a robber, kind of a Robin Hood-esque figure. But one thing from Stalin's early life is the fact that Stalin was put into prison and sent into exile for 8 times, and 7 of them he managed to escape. Stalin, but when the Stalin was put into prison for the first time, he managed to become the leader of the local Communist Party while in prison and organized the work through letters of a bunch of anti-Tsarist typographies and underground presses. So he got elected leader of the Communist Party while in prison. So he got sent to Siberia. He escaped from there twice. First time he came back because he wasn't prepared for the long walk home. Second time he escaped. And when he escaped, he was moved, he was kind of caught and put into another prison. 2 days later, he made a prison riot there. The prison riot succeeded, and all the things they demanded were kind of approved. For that, he was moved to another prison. And 2 or 3 days again, he made a riot there.
Yeah, he was kind of king of the riots, yeah.
Basically, at one point I understood that, I'm not exactly sure that Stalin had any understanding of the very concept of morality. Because this is the one thing. Stalin was extremely efficient at what he was doing because he just didn't understand that people's deaths or human suffering for the idea. Yeah, there's the idea and then there's human suffering, and human suffering means nothing to Stalin. Because the more I've learned about him, he was just, in my eyes, incapable of empathy or any emotional connection with anyone whatsoever. And I do have to give it to Tito, because Tito almost matches him at this. Of course,
he
Tito
started off quite Stalinist.
Stalin. Yeah, but the thing is, at least as Tito, and this is going to be, Tito is going to write about this way later, and let me find this. But yeah, in the 25th of May, 1974, Tito was giving an interview in the newspaper The Fight or The Struggle. It's called Borba, and it could be translated different ways. And by the way, these struggle or fight newspapers were everywhere in the Soviet kind of Eastern European bloc, and they gave him basically a question asking him which kind of decision was harder for you. Was it the decision of a difficult fight against Hitler in the years of war, or later in the connection with the Stalin's positions on things? And Tito gave an interesting answer to this. And he said that the decision to start fighting against Hitler, it wasn't difficult at all. We were we were doomed to take on the fight. And I'm translating here kind of in the meaning sense. Literally, you will not be able to understand Russian. Russian metaphors should be better left out because they involve swear words. Anyway, but to take the decision in context with Stalin's position was much more difficult for me, because for me, as a disciplined communist internationalist, it was extremely scary and hard to go to such a step, to make such a decision. But as I understood what was the case about, and what was the whole thing about in this case, what Stalin really wanted, and it was all about the growth of socialism in the world in the future, and the socialistic relationships with the rest of the world, and about what should be the relationships between the socialist countries and how socialism should evolve as such. Well, then I understood that I had to make this kind of burning the bridges down decision, and this was the breaking point. This was the decision to start the battle, so that all the socialist countries wouldn't be under the dictatorship of Stalin.
Yeah.
This is 1974. And you know what?
Wait, so 1974 is when he said that, but he's referring to much earlier.
Much earlier, yeah. And I'm supposed to fight for Stalin here, and I'll do that with nice dose of terrible humor, but I do have to give credit to that, and I'm not sure about Stalin, but I know that Tito is definitely way more badass than Hitler. Because you know what? It's one thing to backstab someone and to just attack him in hopes of winning him.
Okay.
And then there's other thing of staring Stalin down, because that's what Tito did.
Right.
He was open about the situation. And Tito was one of the very few men who have managed to stare Stalin down and survived.
That's the thing about Tito, is he had balls.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether it was a smart idea or not is an entirely other question. But that anyone would stare down Stalin not having like nuclear weapons on their side to back them up and just having basically just podunk little Yugoslavia, that takes balls. That takes balls.
It does. And one thing I want to know, Tito was ridiculously badass, and then there's this classical statement about Stalin sending assassins to Tito and them failing, and Tito just responding that stop sending assassins to me or I'll send one to you and he will not fail. That's kind of anecdotal or anything, but the fact is that you do have to understand that what Tito did was unheard of. Mm-hmm. It was madness. Mm-hmm. It was like, and not like Tito himself was a very kind and generous and good person. Mm-hmm. Just, it's one of these things that when I speak about Stalin on my show, I have started to admire Stalin for his, if you see ballsiness, which basically is like, you Americans use Man of Steel for Superman, but I believe that if Stalin was Soup's adversary, not Lex Luthor, then Soups would have lost long time ago,
right?
And would be just somewhere there in gulags producing free energy for the Soviet state running in hamster wheels,
okay?
Right? Because you have to understand that at least I'm going to speak for myself. I'm pretty sure you'll agree to this. We're not glorifying these leaders. We're just looking at their role. But it's like speaking about Genghis Khan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You at one point you just get stunned about like, what's wrong with these guys? It's like other people, given their situation, would be like, oh my god, what's going on? These guys are like, well, I guess some people gonna have to die now. Oh well.
Yeah, that's the thing about these guys, right? So they fit the mold of old world, old style leaders. Like if they were in Genghis Khan's time, if they were in Alexander the Great's time, they would have fit right in. But in modern times, they stand out as dictators and as brutal, right? So it's a whole different mindset.
It's something that it's. And I'm putting my philosophy in here. I'm sorry, I have to do it in every episode. This is the second episode I'm in, and I'm ruining Brendan's second episode. Right? No. The thing is, the mindset is what matters here. Mm-hmm. The very fact that we normal people tend to think that other people think kind of like us. Mm-hmm. I have issues with empathy myself, but my wife tells me that empathy allows you to kind of understand how other people feel. Well, and I'm not gonna lie, I have undergone some nice treatment because I would be a terrible sociopath otherwise.
Uh-oh.
And no, seriously, it's a thing. It's my trouble. But honestly, I kind of, and on a bad day. On a bad day, I will sometimes, sit down, and if someone has pissed me off, I will just read a book and in my head invent immense amount of tortures about my hated people. I will never realize that, of course, because I'm a functioning sociopath. But
adjusted.
These people, they had no moral qualms, I'm trying to be the good guy. They didn't even pretend to be the good guy. They thought being a good guy is something that made you lose. Mm. Like, good guys are losers. Mm. Not killing a bunch of people? Pfft. If you can't kill if you can't kill at least 1 million people, you're not a great leader, obviously. Pfft, what is this? And at the same time, okay, we've passed out, but the thing is, these people have a different mindset. These people are basically playing chess, and they're just, as you would sacrifice a pawn, these people are ready to sacrifice insane amounts of things but they are also both true believers of their cause.
Yes, absolutely.
That's one thing that must be.
Yep.
You might call them cynical, but they're cynical in a way that they're ready to sacrifice anything for their cause, but they have this idea that they do believe in.
Right.
They're not faking their beliefs in communism.
Right.
Because I have heard a lot of commenters these days stating that, well, their communism and their ideas was just something they used to drive their own ambition. And I said it's all wrong. No. Their ambition stemmed from their ideologies, and they were fanatical believers in this thing, in their own separate forms of this.
Right. Yep.
You do have to put this in context, is the fact that this was done in the name of something, and you can only, basically, otherwise, in their both separate countries, both Tito and Stalin, essentially in their own countries, they didn't have need for money. They could have just acquired anything what was necessary, okay? Mm-hmm. And at one point, when you have basically achieved a position of almost godhood, mm-hmm. then why do you keep going?
Right.
So it's like it's like this what we're talking about here isn't the point is we might just make funny jokes about Tito versus Stalin, but it's actually a clash of different thoughts of socialism, of how socialism should go. So these guys these guys are, like I love to say, they embody ideas. Mm-hmm. That's why there is Stalinism and Titoism, because these guys are basically ascend from being mortal men. Because, for example, Stalin himself, he used to yell at he had a stepson. Mm-hmm. Like, he had a stepson and he had a son. And his son, at one point, started signing his letters Stalin, and he started using this term, Stalin.
Okay.
So Stalin himself yelled at his own son, and he told him, "No, you're not Stalin." He said, "Well, I'm your son. I mean, that makes me Stalin." He said, "No, you're not Stalin. Even I'm not Stalin. Stalin is in the newspapers. Stalin is in the press. Stalin runs the country. Stalin is in the mind of the people. What Stalin says goes. You haven't deserved to be Stalin. You're not the idea." Okay?
Right.
And this uncovers a madness, which we, the normal people, I doubt that it would take a series. It's like in the mind of, like, you have to stare in the mouth of madness, and the madness stares back, and you become a bit more insane when discussing this. And now that I've brought in depression to this show,
no, that was all good.
But I thought this was really important to say.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. No, okay. So, but now let's get to the history of their conflict, right? So the backstory of how they kind of come into conflict. You can find like some of the backstory in my Titoism series on Dead Ideas, particularly the second episode. But here's the super quick gist, right? Okay, so we all know Stalin. Everybody knows about Stalin, right?
But his second episode is not out at this time of recording, so I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, this is news to Christoph's too. But anyway, so basically, Tito fought for Austro-Hungary against Tsarist Russia in World War I, but he was taken prisoner. And there, as a prisoner of war in Russia, that's where he discovered communism and became radicalized. And then after World War I, he became a communist spy going all over Europe and kept his final alias, Tito, as a permanent name. And then going back to Yugoslavia, he joined the Communist Party, which was soon purged by Stalin of everyone except Tito, because Stalin thought that the others were just apparently worthless or something. So by default, Tito kind of became the leader of the Communist Party in Yugoslavia, which wasn't in power yet at the time. They were just, people who were, hoping for someday something to happen in Yugoslavia. And then World War II broke out. And when World War II broke out and Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers, then Tito started a communist resistance group of partisans. And that's really where our Tito-Stalin relationship begins here. They didn't really... I'm not sure exactly when it was that they met, but they met infrequently.
Oh, I can tell you when they met.
Yeah.
I can tell you when they met, by the way.
Okay.
Because they first met during wartime.
Okay, it was during wartime, yes. Okay.
It was during wartime, and the thing is, what Stalin didn't like at all was the fact that Tito at that point was the marshal of the Yugoslavian forces.
Yes.
Of this, I know how it's in Russian... DKU, KPU, Komunističke partije Jugoslavije, Communist Party of Yugoslavia. But he was also kind of the leader of what was it?
The partisans is what we called them in English.
Yeah. The partisans. I just they had this partisan organization which was DPO or something of that sort.
Okay.
He was the leader of this, and he met Stalin as a marshal of his own forces, while Stalin was the marshal of the Soviet Union. So they had the same military kind of grade. The military, one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
They were both military rank. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Stalin was very disappointed about the fact that they met as equals, because the Soviet Union was much larger and was seen back then as okay, I'm start dropping my accent now. And was seen basically as the central of the Comintern.
Mm-hmm.
And Tito viewed himself as Stalin's equal when they first met. So that is why Stalin already from the first meeting, he was used to people, being subservient to him, people being below Stalin, and that came also from kind of these, how we call them, brotherly republics, friendly republics, like Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia, all these places. And here, everyone's subservient to Stalin, except Tito. Tito is just equal to him. And that pissed off Stalin so much.
Yeah, so from the very start, it was just, you could tell that it was going to be frenemies at best. I like that, Kristaps, you got in the first swing before the bell even rang. I think that was like dirty, true Stalin style. Okay, so let's ring the bell now for round 1 of our boxing match, right? Covering World War II era. But already, Stalin's got Tito like on the ropes here, right?
I have to give a legal disclaimer here, because by this point on my show we're not on World War II, and that I say I shall, with Dan Carlin's approval, by the way, I shall fix the holes that Dan left in the Eastern Front, because he left out a lot of shit, a lot of terrible stuff, and whatever I say on this podcast shall be explained in detail in future episodes, because we will have at least 3 months of World War II.
Nice.
At the very least. Because, oh my god, 60 million people died.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, let's get right to it, okay? So, round 1, and Tito's going to come back from that, like sucker punch that Stalin just got in, and say that we were the first ones to fight the fascists.
I'll give you a freebie.
When you guys were still buddy with Hitler and thinking you were just going to divide Poland and then be friends after that, the Axis powers were already invading Yugoslavia. On April 6, 1941, the Germans, Italians, and Hungarians all invade, and it wasn't until June 22nd of that year that Hitler stabs Stalin in the back and invades the USSR.
At the same time, by the way, and I'm giving you some bonus points because Tito needs some help from the other side as well. At the same time, by the way, a lot of people in the West. I will, obviously. You deserve it. Basically, the idea was that in the West, this fact that this partisan movement existed was kind of toned down, because at this point, no one in the West and the Allied side is trying to even paint Tito as a hero. No. They're all around this Dmitry Mikhailovich, which was the person whom the mass media in Great Britain and USA they wanted to make this Mikhailovich as the leader of the resistance in Yugoslavia.
Yep.
And they made him the Yugoslavian Robin Hood, the Wonder Man, the Great Man, everything. So basically, that in the West created this myth that the anti-fascist movement in Yugoslavia was led by him, when in fact Mikhailovich's movement wasn't supported by the people, and Tito was the real man who was doing everything. Yeah, and how that so Mikhailovich's resistance movement, that was what was the Chetniks, and then the partisans, those were the Tito resistance movements. There's 2 different movements, right? And the thing was, when the Axis powers came in, for every 1 German that was killed by Yugoslavs, resistance fighters, then they would kill 100 Yugoslavs as retaliation. And in response, Mihailovich and his Chetniks were like, there's too many of our own people dying. We're just going to hang back and kind of do more passive resistance. But Tito kept fighting, and that really won the people's hearts and minds, even though more of them were dying because of it. But at the same time, all of them dying only made them more and more pissed off and wanted to fight back against the Germans and also the Italians and the Hungarians and the Croatians, which at the time were under the Stasi, who the Germans installed as basically fascist satellite, I guess you could say.
Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to put in here as like a second jab here is that Stalin, you told all of your all the other communist resistance movements and all the countries all around to be anti-fascist, anti-Axis, but you told them not to actively be pro-communist in their movements because you didn't want to alienate the allies by piss them off by spreading communism amongst them. But I was like, that's not happening. We got to be for something, not just against something. So I went pro-communist from the very start with my partisan movement, put red stars on their caps, taught them about communism in my camps. I am a true Marxist.
Well, being a true Marxist isn't that difficult if you speak about Stalin true Marxism. And about the World War II, oh my god, 15 minutes rant from Kristaps here. See, the thing is, I am, at the given moment of recording, I am digging through an insane amount of sources at the beginning of World War One. World War Two, I'm sorry, World War Two. And honestly speaking, I cannot give you a straight answer on, and I've been asked this a lot, why Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. And I can't give you a straight answer on the question, what was Stalin's plans at this point. Because, and my opinion might change as I do more research, it's just that the very fact that a lot of Western sources, and later on Khrushchev, will depict Stalin as paranoid and afraid of Hitler. When he had a numerical advantage, when his tanks were basically all prepared in the offensive formation. The thing is, I do believe at this point that Stalin would attack Hitler and would just sweep through Western Europe on his own as the Great Liberator if Hitler hadn't attacked him.
Oh.
That's another thing, and he was planning on attacking this. Maybe, okay? This is extremely controversial shit that I'm talking right now, okay? Because the thing is, the mainstream idea of the history goes that Stalin was just prepared, like you said, being friendly, but it doesn't work together with everything else that I know about Stalin. At no point it works. See, Stalin, his whole life, was ruthless and calculating, was never surprised. The idea that he let himself be surprised just doesn't make any sense in context. However, it kind of helps in the political spectrum, because over here it's better politically stuff. And for now, like I said, for now, because I'm doing a lot of research for this, and there's a reason I left it for like late in my show, it kind of seems more likely that Stalin wanted Hitler to start like his massive evil war of oppression so that he could come in as a liberator and install socialist governments everywhere. So in a way, Tito, with his resistance, ruined his plans, if you believe this theory. And again, this is just my opinion from the facts that I have gathered, because over here in these parts, because this thing kind of changes Stalin's plans.
Wait, yeah, like so how did it ruin his plans?
One of the thing is, like you said previously, and one of the more interesting things about the World War II is the fact that Hitler came to power by winning elections. And Social Democrats and Socialists in those elections previously were supposed to run in the single bloc in Germany. Stalin specifically prohibited the communists of Germany to run in the single bloc, which basically caused them to lose the elections. So if they had run in the single bloc, they would have gotten more votes than Hitler, and they would have the chancellorship. Due to Stalin's orders, Hitler won the elections. Due to specific Stalin's documented orders. Okay. Due to his orders.
Okay.
Due to his orders, basically he said no. Screw those guys. Hitler is our buddy. Let's let him win. And when Germany was demilitarized, Stalin basically invited Hitler's officers, and essentially Stalin gave all the Hitler's tank corps training. Gave a military experience. And there are insane things about this situation, but these things are documented. So in a very fucked up way, Stalin had a master plan throughout all this situation. And he was surprised by Hitler, but I really think he had some plans on his own. But I'm getting here in the massive hate mail territory. But like I said, these are all theories, and these are all weird things. And I'm not trying to say that anything was. See, in the game of more evil, there are no winners; there are just losers. I'm just stating that beginning of World War II and the period where Tito is resisting fascism is kind of another thing which I might see here is the fact that Tito is resisting Hitler at the very period where Stalin was sort of playing Hitler for his own agenda. Of course, I might change my opinion when this is actually aired, but so far, from what I have seen and researched, it kind of seems that Stalin was pissed on... Tito used this in an argument, because later on, Stalin would go on to be this great defender against fascism. But if you think about it, this was his plan all along, just let Hitler weaken everyone and then we can come in and conquer everything and be the great saviors of everything. Then Stalin cannot liberate Yugoslavia if Yugoslavia doesn't need liberation. So Stalin cannot take over Yugoslavia.
Sure.
This is, and again, okay, it's just a theory here. And it's so controversial, this early war. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. Because all these moments about this... And by the way, I'm not sure if you listened to this, but which date, again, Stalin... did you know the date when Hitler attacked the Soviet Union?
Yes. I had just said it, and it is June 22nd, 1941. Yeah.
According to some documents, Stalin had planned on launching an attack on Hitler himself just 3 days later, on June 25th. According to some theories, again.
So basically...
See, you don't get this.
So basically, Stalin lost the initiative role.
Yeah, and you know what kind of supports this fact?
Uh-huh.
The fact that, do you know when the Soviets celebrated their victory in the World War II, as they call it, the Great Fatherland War, which is different because they only celebrate the war against Hitler. There is no celebrations on the 8th of May, and there are no celebrations after the defeat of Japan. They celebrate their victory in their Great Fatherland War, which they separate from World War II, because their war lasted not from 1939, from 1941. They celebrate on the 9th of May. The thing is, the first celebrations of this thing happened only after the death of Stalin. During Stalin's era, there were no parades, no Victory Day celebrations, no nothing. Stalin even wasn't accepting the glories of winning the war himself. It was Zhukov. Stalin wasn't even on the parade first. Khrushchev in 1965 set up this date for the first time ever. There was no victory in the World War II for Soviet Union until 1965. And one of the theories is that Stalin wanted to basically spread socialism through France and everything. He wanted to be the great conqueror, and in a way, Americans screwed over Stalin by attacking Hitler first, rather than anything else. But again, we're delving into the territory where you're gonna get so much hate mail for this, and so am I. But it's just that we're discussing World War II. And we're touching Eastern Front. There is literally, no matter what you say about this, zero way of not pissing people off about this in here. Because I'm pretty sure the people from Yugoslavia see we live in the shadow of this war. So I do have, and again, we're talking about Tito. And this Tito argument is, again, one of the reasons why people actually think that Stalin was sort of behind the World War II himself. And I'm sorry, it's fucked up, and I'm really scared to speak about this, because whenever you mention such things, do you know what the first thing is gonna come to my mail? The fact that I'm a Nazi! I'm obviously a Nazi scumbag! Yeah, because they killed half of my family too, and I obviously love Nazis, because, Soviets killed one part of my family, Nazis killed the other part, so I must love them both in one way or another, okay? Let's just move on. Beginning of World War II rages me. I'm giving you this round, and I have raged enough of it.
All right, ding, ding, ding. Okay, The towels go out, the fighters go to their separate corners, yeah. So Tito
like
got in a few jabs and made Stalin really angry.
While Stalin was doing incomprehensible things in the corner, raging at the world. No, but look, I'm really sorry for this, and you can cut this out. It's just that, just an explanation just for you as a podcast. Look, there's a reason why I started with Khrushchev, because World War II is so terribly complex, and like all the Western sources basically state that Stalin was kind of this good guy who didn't expect Hitler to rise to power, but I just don't understand these historians myself, because there is so much evidence on the contrary that it's kind of this weird whole poor Stalin story just it irritates me, and I'm looking from the facts from both sides, and there are of course things that maybe Stalin was the good guy and maybe he had different intentions, but we're talking about the dude whose reality shifted his own birth date. Okay, and really, I've been called a Nazi for like 9 gazillion times already by fanatical modern day Marxists because I dare to criticize Stalin. Please don't put this on the show. I just,
Well, what we should do though, is we should take this part out and we should release it as like a special episode on your feed or maybe on your Patreon. It's really interesting.
Oh well, you do what you want with this. It's gonna be fine. It's just that. It's very fucking complex to talk about. Like and this is why Dan Carlin gave me his approval of this, by the way, because I told him all these controversies that are still here and how they basically determine the modern day political stance of Russia towards us. Because you see, Russia denies that there ever was a violent occupation of the Baltic states. Or that there was a really aggressive war against Finland. Russia claims that it was people of Finland who asked the Soviet Union to come invade their evil, oppressive government.
Of course it was.
At the same time,
like one person.
What happened in Baltic states in 1940, before the Hitler ever attacked Soviet Union, was basically the fact what happened in Crimea. They signed a deal with our countries to keep their military forces here. And we agreed, so they brought their armies in. And at one point, they just declared that our governments have screwed them over, and that they would be overthrowing these governments and be holding free elections with Soviet military personnel and tanks on our streets, and KGB officers just looking at how you vote, and if you voted the wrong way, you'd be taken away, okay? And all, like, the other parties, like, it wasn't a fair election at all. It was, like, under extreme duress and stress. But because this joining of the Soviet Union happened because of elections, it doesn't matter that they were ridiculous and terrible. So this is why Russians still today claim that they have some legitimate claims on these lands, and this is the reason why they do all these things in this region, in Ukraine, and they are very aggressive about the Baltics. Because they firmly believe that we joined Russia on our free accord, because that suits their political needs, and they abuse World War II to maximum, like, whatever they can. World War II is the only reason why they claim Crimea, you see. World War II here still plays a major political role. And one thing I have to give to Tito, and leave from this on the show what you want, but I have to give it to Tito. This is the reason why Russia isn't meddling in the Balkans today. Because of Tito. Because Tito stood firm against this. Because Tito did not allow his own country's history to be screwed over. He resisted Stalin, so Stalin couldn't rewrite the history of the Yugoslavian people, of all these Yugoslavian peoples, Serbs, Croats, Slovenians, everyone. And that is the biggest thing that Tito did, historically speaking, what I think. Because, right now, in these countries, Russia has almost zero political traction, and that's because of Tito. So they're way safer than we are now here.
Yeah, that's interesting. That definitely has to be released somewhere. Yeah.
Well, you do with this what you want. It's just that I'm sorry. When it comes to World War II, you just struck a nerve. I hope you are not too angry.
Oh, me? No, not at all. Not at all. Okay, but let's. I do have to get going eventually. So
okay. Go on. I am so sorry.
Okay, so So let's move on to round 2. Round 2 is the showdown after World War II, where things really come to a head between Tito and Stalin. So we're going 1946 to 1948 for this round, okay? So in round 2 here...
I dare to disagree, sir!
So in this era, mutual slights and insults, such as that marshal's uniform that we were talking about in the last round, really bring tensions to a boil, right? Okay, and one of the things also that happened during World War II was towards the end, when Yugoslavia was being liberated and starting to kick out the Axis, Tito's partisans couldn't take Belgrade without the artillery that the Soviets had. They needed the Soviets' help to do that, but Tito demanded that the Soviets withdraw as soon as Belgrade is taken. And Stalin agreed, not because he was like, oh, sure, that's reasonable, but because he needed to send his troops to Hungary anyway. But that was exactly like the marshal's uniform, where it really pissed him off with this idea, like, you can give me an order?
I can give you extremely accurate data about the Soviet help.
Okay.
Soviets sent 155,000 of rifles, 35,000 of automatic rifles, 155,000 of bolt-action rifles, 16,000 of heavy machine guns, 6,000 of like these mine throwers, grenade throwers, heavy weaponry, like these mortars and stuff. About 50 planes and 70 tanks.
But here's the thing, and this pisses off Stalin too. After the war, Tito and his partisans claim openly that they liberated themselves. It was not the Soviets that liberated them; they liberated Yugoslavia, and that doesn't sit well.
Well, first off, I do have to say that what doesn't sit well first is the very declaration of Yugoslavia. Because in the 7th of March 1945, according to the recommendations of the Yalt Conference, Tito forms the Temporary People's Government of the Democratic Federated Yugoslavia, which was basically later that month de jure kind of admitted as to exist by the Soviet Union, United States of America, and Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these, basically, he became the prime minister, basically the chairman of the Council of Ministers, and the Minister of Defense at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, the Soviet Union were the first ones to send a ambassador to this new government. Because, they make this government and they make this their declaration, of what they're going to do and who they are, like, blah, 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 we are the new Yugoslavian government, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they send their ambassador first in the 12th of March. Of course, stating that with this ambassador comes also the help and support to the brotherly nations of Yugoslavia. But, a day later, in a closed top-secret letter, which was addressed to Tito, Kardelju, Hebrangu, apparently from the Soviet side, there was a stated disappointment of the declaration of this Yugoslavian government, which they called to be pale or weak. They stated that, they basically were angry that the new Yugoslavian government didn't strongly show that the Soviet Union was basically responsible for the liberation of the country.
Right.
And that there was a lack of a strong position in the question of becoming closer with other Slavic countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that there was some sort of a muted role of the Soviet Union in the forming of this country. Mm-hmm. And they specifically mentioned that, quote, being silent in this question cannot be good to the new democratic Yugoslavia. So the Soviet government, well, basically Stalin, they stated that the failures of this declaration of this new Yugoslavian government, basically they are basically the pressure. They are basically the result of the pressure of Shubarshin and Grola, who, from the very first steps of the new Yugoslavian government, tried to tried to push their own vision on the democratic Yugoslavia. Basically, Stalin didn't like these two members of parliament, this Grol and Shubashin. And Tito, in his response, basically responded that he basically had to put in these two people in his parliament because Grol was necessary, because that would make the situation in Yugoslavia easier in the first part, because that would be, quote, it would be easier in this way to break the Serbian reaction, because at this point, at the moment of the creation of Yugoslavia, Serbs still want their own country. And secondly, without this Grol, the Allied forces would not give the de jure kind of recognition to this new country. And Stalin basically responds to this response in the letter which he writes on the 15th of March 1945, and he now is demonstratively openly addressing Tito, Kardelli, and Hebron, and he says that Tito's argumentation is wrong, and he stands on his own that these people should be dealt with accordingly. So another thing that Tito did wrong, sort of, according to Stalin, was that basically Tito made a public dinner of all the new kind of ambassadors in his country. In the honor of there was an official dinner made by Tito for the ambassadors of the United States, of Great Britain, and the USSR, and some others. But in the kind of the more honorary place, which would, by the way, follow at that point with the common diplomatic etiquette, according to like the elderness of the diplomats, according to the amount of time spent in the country, they didn't put the USSR diplomat in the place of honor in the table. They put the Great Britain's diplomat in the place of honor on the table, even though the British diplomat had kind of deserved it because he was longer in the country, and there's a lot of rules of diplomatic protocol. Stalin did not take that well, a lot.
I didn't know this part.
There was there, yeah, and this was one of the slides that kind of Tito did. See, Tito later stated that he did everything according to protocol, and this is what he did. But then we're talking about Stalin here, and Stalin couldn't give less shits about protocol, even if shits were pointing gun at his head, and Stalin would be like laughing in their face.
What he cares about is that when he looks eye to eye with another person, they back down and acknowledge his dominance. He's the alpha.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tito, right from the beginning, decides that, you know what? I'm playing against Stalin here, but whatever. I am not a huge fan of Stalin, if someone didn't kind of guess. Not a huge fan of Tito either, but anyways. Tito basically decides that that this kind of happens, and he'll rule in his own country. But yeah, this doesn't stop Tito, because Tito arrives with his delegation, first delegation ever, to the Soviet Union in the 5th of April 1945. In the 11th of April 1945, Tito and Molotov, again, I mentioned the nicknames. Molotov is the diplomat, by the way, and Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is the pact which basically screwed Eastern Europe in general in World War II, just saying. And Molotov would later be killed by Stalin, because who wasn't?
Right.
When Stalin was there, and Tito and Molotov signed a Soviet-Yugoslavian kind of a friendship treaty of, quote, brotherly help and all-around cooperation. And later on the 13th of April, 2 days later, Mikoyan, which is at that point Soviet minister, and Petrovich, they basically put their signatures on another deal, which basically means that, like free trade agreement between USSR and Yugoslavia. During all this time, Stalin twice invited Tito on his own summer house for dinner. And the weirdest part is, at this point, everyone's
Did Tito bring the wrong kind of hot dish or something?
Tito never went there.
Oh,
Tito politely
he
refused.
Snubbed him? He snubbed Stalin.
Tito snubbed Stalin. And that's like 3 times already by this point. Everyone else who snubbed Stalin previously was dead. Yeah, was dead. Either dead or in a gulag, aka soon to be dead. Okay, but at the same time, Tito, by the way, he gave an interview to the newspaper The Red Star, because communist newspapers are always fun in names, and he declared at this point this extreme warmth and honest-heartedness and kindness with whom I was greeted everywhere by the Soviet people left a huge impact on me. So Tito is basically extremely polite and extremely nice and extremely kind. And he's still paying lip service to everything. So,
well, I would be too. I mean, until I'm ready to actually come out and make a decisive move, like I'm not going to follow Stalin, I would be doing my damnedest to make it at least look like I was.
Yeah, but see, this is the thing that, and this has to be taken with a huge grain of salt. And this is going to be more in the next part, but basically, I use a lot of Khrushchev's memoirs when I'm doing my Stalin series. But the thing is, Khrushchev did everything he could to separate himself from Stalin, because during Stalin's era, Khrushchev was basically the general commissar, one of the main leaders of Kharkov, and then leaders of Ukraine in general. And Khrushchev signed a lot of these papers of mass murder. So Khrushchev was as much involved in Stalin's massacres than anyone else. He just, liked to cleanse his own name after this. That's why the 20th Congress went there, so that, all the people involved in the mass butchery of other people would, cleanse. That's what I go on in my very first episodes, by the way.
Okay.
They denounced Stalinism because they were all involved in Stalinism. They just wanted their hands clean. Just saying. Khrushchev wasn't a very non-murderous guy. He just, pretended he wasn't, so that, we didn't know anything about 20 million dead. It was all Stalin.
And that's going to be a little foreshadowing for the end of this episode here, when there's a rapprochement between Yugoslavia and the USSR under Khrushchev. But before the bell rings at the end of this round, I want to get in a few jabs.
I just want to state something about what's going on, like in the next round, because Khrushchev writes in his memoirs, and he writes in his report about the cult of personality and its consequences. And he writes as he remembers that the Stalin had, in the latest period of his life, he became more capricious?
Yeah, capricious. That's right.
Capricious, more rude, more irritated. His suspicion about everything was way more pronounced. His mania of being followed was raised to insane levels. A lot of his staff became sudden enemies of his. After the war, Stalin even more was just moving away from the collective, worked absolutely alone, and he didn't coordinate his actions with anyone. So here he speaks about the deepening of Stalin's paranoia. Now, one thing is for sure, Stalin became way more depressed after World War II, for insane reasons, but you have to take these words with a grain of salt, because later on Khrushchev would solely blame Stalin for all these struggles with Tito, because Stalin at this point is, not doing anything. Up to 1948, Soviet newspapers are basically writing that, we are friendly with Yugoslavia, everything is awesome, great Yugoslavian leader Tito, and it doesn't matter what happens in truth, because as you know now, there were conflicts before, there were just slinging, but the real loser of all this is the Soviet man. The Soviet man gets kept in the darkness. Everything is great between the socialist republics. Same as with China, mind you, because, later on they would break with them too. At this point, all the peoples of both countries, because I'm pretty sure this happened in Yugoslavia as well, because I am literally looking at a picture of 22nd of June 1941 Yugoslavian newspaper here. And yeah, its Russian translation also states that, yeah, Stalin was praised there as the great leader of the communist countries.
Well, he was in 1941. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, if you think about this, they might have hated each other, but what about their people?
Well, yes. And we'll get there, too, right? Okay, so I want to get a few jabs in. Okay, so the clock is ticking down to the end of this round, right? So Tito's pissed off at Stalin because during the war, he feels like he didn't really get enough attention, enough aid from the Soviet Union. And also after the war, too.
Notice me, senpai.
Because, exactly. And after the war, too, because after the war, of course, that's the very beginning of the Cold War, and everything is focused on what's going to happen between the Great West, led by the only country that didn't get bombed to shit, which is America, and the East, led by the Soviet Union, of course. And that's all focused on, places like Berlin and the division between East Berlin and West Berlin. Yugoslavia is relatively far from all that. It's not right on the Soviet borders, and it's not like a major focus. So neither during the war nor after it did Tito feel like he really got enough support from the Soviets. And then another thing that pissed him off was the coastal city, the port town of Trieste, which is on the Adriatic coast, facing Italy. Tito wanted Trieste and had taken that area during the war and wanted to keep it, but Stalin bargained it away as like a bargaining chip, giving it back to Italy, hoping to gain concessions from the West in this much larger balance of power game in which Tito's opinion didn't matter. So that pissed him off. And then furthermore, around 1946, even though at this point Tito and Stalin are both exactly the same communist, ideologies and everything, and they're supposedly best buds, and the West even thinks that Yugoslavia is Soviet satellite number one.
So you're giving me this round because while Stalin's playing massive games of power with Truman, and by the way, Stalin wrote about Harry Truman, and he was like, Stalin honestly thought that Harry Truman was a complete noob at politics and that he had him around his finger. He thought the same about FDR, and he had zero respect for American leaders. And while he's playing the big boys game, Tito is like, "Notice me!"
Exactly, right? So it's like Tito's like trying to like punch him, and Stalin is just holding his forehead with his hand, and he just can't quite get to him. Yeah. But what the USSR does is they send in spies to Yugoslavia under the guise of making a documentary about the Yugoslav resistance. But the script portrays Tito in a minor role during the war, and that pisses off Tito. And then it turns out that they're spies, and so it's just like, it really screws things up between them. And then finally, when it all boils over, it's 1947, Tito signed something called the Bled Agreement with Bulgaria to affirm, quote, friendship, cooperation, and mutual assistance, basically forming like a special kind of little alliance between them. And, they're both heads of state, so they have the official right to do that, but Stalin is not consulted, and this severely pisses off Stalin. And after that, it's done between them.
He also himself stated that nationalistic line thinking like this can only result in Yugoslavia turning into a common bourgeoisistic republic. And we cannot have that, comrades! Why am I sending all these spies in every other country if they just act like as they want?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Brandon,
yeah.
I think your microwave has its doors open. I'm getting reports here.
Sorry, what?
Your microwave, like you left it open?
Is this like some kind of assassination attempt?
No, my agent in the fridge is getting cold. Just so you noticed.
All right. So you're spying on me right now.
No, I'm not.
I got you. That's good. So all of this boils over, and in June of 1948, Yugoslavia is expelled from the Kominform, which is basically the organization of all the communist states, right? And it's the cool club, and if you're out of the cool club, you're just plain out, right?
Dude, yeah, and this is just amazing because I'm reading right now from from a dude called Martin. I can't really find it because it's like, oh boy. And now we're getting into weird territory, folks. You know how Russian internet works, don't you? You don't. Okay, fuck it,
Nope.
you don't. Russian internet works like this. There are some ordinary people, and then there are sites which are funded by the government, because every site which gets more than 3,000 visitors per month, which would be mine and yours and everyone else's, like you get more than 3,000 downloads a month. That means you are mass media in Russia.
Okay.
And that means that if someone comments something on your... Imagine, if you were in Russia, and you would run your show, and someone would post a racist comment on your site, and you would notice it for a while, then you would be put in prison for allowing this, because you take full responsibility. That's amazing, isn't it? So there are a lot of sites, a lot of weird stuff created by propaganda, and one of the things which I found while researching this was a person from St. Petersburg called Martans, and he wrote in his paper "Другой взгляд на Сталина," or "Запрещенный Stalin," or basically, which means another look at Stalin, or Forbidden Stalin. And he writes about the revisionism of Tito and the United States of America, because Tito was an American spy all along.
Of course,
and he writes, because these things are everywhere, you guys, and that is why I'm having so much fun about researching this. Basically, he writes that the CIA spies worked with Tito himself. They basically managed to convert Tito to capitalism. And that, quote, in the June of 1948, the Information Bureau of the Communist Parties, where the representatives of the 9 parties went, they basically published a resolution with a critic of the Yugoslavian Communist Party. And in that declaration, it was stated that Tito does not give enough attention to the growth of class differences in the countryside, and he doesn't care about the capitalistic elements in his country. He is not dealing with them fast enough. In this resolution, it was stated, in the resolution in which Tito got thrown out, mind you, in this resolution was stated that Tito has taken a bourgeoisistic, nationalistic position, and that the Yugoslavian Communist Party has broken the united front against capitalist imperialism.
Uh-huh.
It's just crazy.
And they called me a heretic too, right? So and like a deviant and all of that.
In some way, they didn't use the word heretic, but that's essentially what it says.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was basically weird, because all of these people are, again, in modern internet, they're using this. And look, as you mentioned in this nationalist episode, this is used to achieve some political goals even today. This is way more depressing than you might even fucking imagine. I'm just making fun and doing fun things, but these things are used to make people vote a certain way. These things are used to instill fear in people. Tito is used in Russia today to instill fear of America, because obviously America stole Yugoslavia from us. America influenced Tito. America sent agents there.
Interesting.
You are the evil guys.
Interesting.
You want to kill my family.
Uh-huh. Well, it's a narrative that's very appealing.
And
sure.
You know what? This doesn't even belong in your show. Because Titoism is not a dead idea. Titoism has just been resurrected and reused.
In that respect.
In that respect, yeah. And you know Tito and Stalin murders are one thing, but when... and a little side note for my listeners, I only use Russian sources when I'm researching this. I don't research anything. I don't Google stuff. I Yandex stuff, which Yandex is the Russian search thing, and I only search for Russian sources because I want to give you stuff that you can't hear elsewhere.
Exactly.
And when I look at modern... And you know how these people call themselves, mind you. They yell at fascists, right? They basically... We are... the Western Europe, according to Russia, are called liberasts, which are gay liberals, like pederasti liberali, like liberal pederasts, and they call us gay fascists. everything's a fascist. Do you know how this group who presents the fact that American spies infiltrated Tito and basically caused the Soviet Union to break because of this? They call themselves National Bolsheviks. They claim they fight against fascism while being National Bolsheviks. Let me remind you that Bolsheviks are essentially socialists. So you make your own conclusions. And this... Welcome to my world! It's impossible to make anything apolitical in this day and age by this point if you're speaking about World War II.
Wow. Okay, so the bell rings to signal the end of round 2, right? Bing, bing, bing.
You are winning!
Well, I don't know. I feel like you're winning, actually, because, like, I was jabbing to beat hell, but you were just, like, holding me at arm's length, so... and you expelled me from the Komen form, and that sucked for Yugoslavia, right? So I think that round goes to you, Stalin. Okay, so round three is the era of 1948 to 1953, when their communist ideologies begin to diverge. And they diverge not because, my impression is not because they originally had different ideas in mind, but because they had this falling out between each other and then wanted to distinguish themselves. So Tito, I don't necessarily think wouldn't have adopted what I'm now calling Titoism unless he had this falling out with Stalin. That's my take on it. But anyway, okay, so after the war, right, and then they get expelled from the Komen form, then they are now a major threat to the USSR. He's finally getting the attention he wanted, right? But now it's negative attention. So they're now a threat right on the Yugoslav border, well, nearly on the Yugoslav borders, on the borders of their satellite states. Okay? And so Stalin orders Eastern Bloc nations, mainly Hungary, but also Albania and Romania, to conduct military exercises on the borders of Yugoslavia. And there's a military buildup. And this is meant as a big stick threat of like, hey, I can invade you anytime I want, and tomorrow I just might do it. And so that's a major blow that Stalin, I feel like, sends in my direction. That's the straight punch right there. Or at least it's telling me I can do the straight punch at any time I want, and I can just take you down. In response, Tito builds up his military to Europe's third largest army at the time. I'm not sure what the other two are, but I'm pretty sure that Europe's first largest army at the time was the USSR. It might have been the first in the world. Is that
See, it was basically the first in the world, because there's this famous saying. See, when the Vatican, the Pope, criticized Stalin about stuff, Stalin said, "Oh yeah, well, how many tank armies does Vatican have?" USSR had more tanks and more military than all of the other countries in Europe combined.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's
the Soviet Union was a massively military. It had 7 tank armies.
Well, everybody else demobilized, but they didn't. So that's the thing,
they didn't
right?
at all.
Yeah.
Basically, conscription service is still going on today in Russia, and it was going on full in strength. Basically, Soviet Union had more tanks. Like, they had 7 tank armies. Each of their tank armies had more tanks than France and Germany combined. Why is Germany combined, okay? It was insane. If it wasn't for nukes, the Soviets could just easily roll over everyone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he's got all this army, right? And he's massing it on my borders. And there's this quote here, and maybe I shouldn't be the one saying Stalin's quote, but it's a great quote, so I'll just go ahead and do it. He says, he's quoted as saying, "I don't want to crush Tito. Tito's basically a good man. I want Tito to recant. I want Tito at my feet begging for forgiveness, and I will forgive him." But here's the thing. Tito doesn't give in. He doesn't back down. Stalin's expecting that, Tito's going to fold. He's calling Tito's bluff, right? But Tito's not bluffing. Instead, what he does is, first of all, he knows the ace in his hand is that if Stalin starts a war in Yugoslavia, that is going to really mess with the whole Cold War politics that are going on between Stalin and the West, right?
Yep.
He can't actually invade without severely upsetting that delicate East-West diplomatic balance.
I just love to imagine how Tito and Gabriel Nasser of Egypt were just, sitting there and cheering with their own glasses and like having fun.
Yeah.
Like, so Gabriel, by the way, a short intro, if you don't know who Gabriel Nasser is, that's the dude who is the only person in living history who managed to get the Iron Cross from the Nazis and then get a Soviet Medal of Honor, basically.
Yeah, but he was Egypt,
which he
right?
wore both, because he was also in this camp of, I'm gonna play you both, guys. And Tito was his kind of... I know that they had some correspondence, at least.
Yeah.
And Stalin can't go to war with Tito, because that would look really bad. Like,
yeah. So it turns out that actually...
Like, Hungary in 1952 looks awful already, and then Czechoslovakia will look terrible as well, like the Prague Spring and everything. But Yugoslavia is just too big and too important. And, there's Tito there. And Tito doesn't care.
Well, see, the thing is, it turns out he knows that Stalin's actually the one bluffing. So Tito calls Stalin's bluff. And then he bargains with Truman instead. And in 1948, accepts aid from the West. And so now he's supported. And now he is not just Yugoslavia, but he's got friends in high places now. And so I feel like that's the part in this round where Tito kind of has his sort of Rocky comeback where he starts really fighting. And now he's got his second wind here. And then at that point, that's when Tito feels empowered to really start implementing a whole different kind of communism. And he starts making speeches that sort of demonize the Soviet Union as just riddled with bureaucratic centralism and this kind of dominating top-down bureaucratic centralized kind of model. And instead, he says, we're going to go a different way in Yugoslavia. We're going to go bottom up. We're going to go decentralization, give more power to the individual republics within the country than the federal government. We're going to have the workers manage their own enterprises, and we're going to actually make good on the Marxist promise of power to the people. And so he spins this in terms of propaganda as like, we're the more true Marxist. We're the better communists. We're the ones actually doing it right. So there.
Well, being the better Marxist doesn't make you a better person.
Well, that's not what we're talking about, though, is it?
What do you mean it's not? Wait, getting more... No, I have actually kind of forgotten what we're talking about, because you know what? For you, maybe it is an important discussion, but for me it's a philosophical look back at these two different ideologies. Because for me it was always like this, I do believe that... the thing is, Tito himself says that he believed in communism, but... at one point, I think he kind of became disillusioned with it, sort of, in a way. Even though after later on he'll get like back to good relations and everything, but he's the only man to ever oppose Stalin and live. Mm-hmm. That makes Tito a badass, but there had to be a Stalin for that to be true.
Yep.
I asked my dad about the situation here, and like, I'm twisting and turning around things, but I asked my dad about how was this struggle looked like, and then I spoke about a lot of people who were like actually alive during the 50s, and at one point, Yugoslavian stuff was like, we over here in the Soviet Union we got our own made stuff, which was crap. Then the next, like, if you could get American stuff, that was only from back market, like American, Western European stuff. But Yugoslavian stuff and Hungarian and like other countries around us was like considered to be way better than the Soviet stuff, but not as quite good as the Western stuff. Yugoslavian stuff, whatever that was, Yugoslavian, just anything, was considered to be miles better than anything else in the Western Bloc. And the people at the time...
in the Eastern Bloc.
The Eastern Bloc, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I am very sorry. It's just, I'm listening. I'm reading from my notes and getting confusing here. But yeah, basically the stuff is that Yugoslavs as such were treated as if they were like, they're capitalists actually, but they're pretending to be Soviet so that we would have peace. Mm-hmm. That was general view. It's like, they're not really in the Eastern Bloc, they're pretenders.
Well, that's the thing, is eventually Tito takes... we're getting outside of our time period now, but Tito takes this to the point where he says, we are not the Eastern Bloc, we're not the Western Bloc, we're not part of any bloc. We're going to organize all the nations that are not part of any bloc and be the non-aligned nations. That doesn't happen till like the 60s, but that's where this is headed.
Yeah, everything kind of gets sort of weird in a way. But then again, everything in history is weird.
Yeah.
The thing is, you can't get straight through anything with like, I don't even know. Jeez.
Okay, well let's.
I'm gonna abuse my situation and tell some political jokes over at it to lighten up the mood.
Okay.
And I like this one. I like this one because from my Jewish half, that there is a small, like, Russians like puns. They like, especially this one was like, this was made from Yosif Guberman, obviously a Jewish author from Odessa, and he wrote, when you're hugging vodka and the regime, under the hugs of vodka and the regime, Russia sleeps and doesn't move. And only Jew, even though he trembles, runs across the line. Yeah, it's about the stuff. The thing is, Yugoslavia was treated as the place where all the Jews run for before running away to Israel. They run to get their own Jewish comrades. Because anti-Semitism was terrible, but it was like created. See, the weirdest thing is, all these jokes about the Jews were made by the Jews in Odessa, which is the fucking creepiest part about the situation. But yeah, Yugoslavia was also seen as one of these places where, before flying to Israel, you would go to Yugoslavia, grab up your cousin, and then fly away to Israel from there.
Okay.
Or, grab your Soviet car, sell it in Yugoslavia, use the money to just go away to Israel. That happened.
Okay, so Yugoslavia is being positioned as basically Jewish in a very derogatory sense. Basically being run by Jews, or being like a home base for Jews, or being just basically
But again, I do have to state that, you know what? I have firmly discovered that basically 90% of Soviet jokes come from Odessa, which is the most Jewish town in the Soviet Union, run by the Jewish organized crime. So all the Jewish jokes are made by Jews, because that's the Ashkenazi way of dealing with troubles.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's you got to laugh at the tragedy, and you could laugh at yourself, but the rest of us don't get that right to laugh at them that way. But
I don't know. See, the thing is, over here in in the Soviet Union, it's kind of weird because the Jewish jokes were kind of made with. Jewish Soviet jokes are made with the Jews at the butt of them, but a lot of the times Jewish are making fun of everyone else, and Jewish jokes and Soviet jokes kind of grew together. Because, in a way, Soviet political anecdote is the same Jewish self-depreciating anecdote, just turned political in the Soviet era. And at one point, they're starting to make jokes about how they're escaping and everything, and it kind of, at one point, these jokes kind of transcended all this situation. It's kind of this part of this Ashkenazi culture, and I don't believe it's derogatory. It's like it's a thing. We're not that. Over here, the local Jewish population is not that angry when someone else tells Jewish jokes from the Soviet Union, because they became everyone's jokes. Because we all lived under this system, and yeah, Yugoslavia sort of. Even though I do still claim that Stalin was always more powerful than the Yugoslavian people, if we claim about who lived better, who had more freedoms in the end, and who actually happened to basically got to live in a better country than the Yugoslavian people want, even though we made terrible jokes about them.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I have heard it said many times that if you had to live in a communist country, Yugoslavia was the place to do it, because they had significantly greater freedoms in some sense, like the ability to travel outside the country without getting major permissions. Your passport would get you into both Eastern Bloc countries and Western Bloc countries. And just in general, there was a lot less centralized restriction and oppression than in many other satellite states of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and in the Soviet Union, again, these political jokes, because Soviet Union's political power was concentrated in the hands of its leaders, and that is this joke that the elected deputy of the higher council of the USSR returns from the government session, and he comes back home, and the wife gives him kind of his dinner, and she asks him, "Well, want to eat some borscht for the first meal?" And the husband just silently raises his arm. Okay, well, will you eat shashlik as your second meal, like for the main meal? And the husband again just silently raises his arm.
So does that mean yes? Raising his arm means yes?
Well, yeah, he votes for it.
Okay, yeah.
And then the wife asks him, "Well, will you want to drink some vodka with me later on?" And then her husband just raises from his seat and just starts applauding massively.
Just like someone in the audience of Stalin's speeches or something.
Yeah, you listened to that episode, you know.
I did.
But yeah, I guess in the end, I would have to say that Stalin is way more intimidating figure than Tito. Tito was bad for sure, but in the end, Yugoslavian people kind of won because of Tito. Mm-hmm. That's my final verdict here.
Yeah, and to put the final word on it. So we don't quite make it to the end of round 3 because what actually puts to an end the Tito-Stalin conflict is that Stalin kicks the bucket. Basically dies March 5th, 1953. And so basically Tito outlasts him. And then, as we were saying earlier in the episode, the next person to take power is Khrushchev, of course, and attempts to distance his image from that of Stalin for all the reasons that Christoph said before. And one of the acts done to make it appear like Khrushchev is going to be a much less tyrannical ruler, etc., is there is a normalizing of relations between the USSR and Yugoslavia. Khrushchev visits Yugoslavia in 1955, tells Yugoslavia, quote, "There are different roads to communism," and their relations normalize. And after that, Tito basically kind of wins an unstated right to continue developing his communism along the ideological lines that he had developed during this conflict with the workers' self-management. And like I said, in 1960, I think it was, they start the movement of non-aligned nations, so not being either Eastern Bloc or Western Bloc, and organizing other nations in forming this kind of neutral faction of a kind. And that's really where things kind of head off in different directions in this timeline. You can imagine an alternate timeline where Stalin lives longer or something else kind of like intervenes, or Tito dies first, and then an entirely different communism develops in Yugoslavia.
But there was this joke, like, what would happen if Stalin would resurrect suddenly? Well, then Khrushchev would definitely run over America with ease.
Because Khrushchev would run over to America. Like he would flee.
This is kind of the more, it's kind of hard. Yeah, that was the thought. But the thing is, all these jokes are in Russian, and sometimes they just don't really translate. And
you need context for them. Yeah.
Yeah, like my favorite still is, what is the most permanent thing in the Soviet Union? Temporary difficulties.
This is just temporary difficulties before we realize the true communism. Yeah.
like communism is like horizon. You can always see there, but it'll never come.
Yeah, it's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which as a young child I actually did chase after once, and I got halfway through a cornfield and realized that I was really tired of running, trying to get that to the end of the rainbow. Yeah.
Anyway, this episode went completely bonkers sideways from what we intended originally.
Yeah, so
it'll do. It'll do.
We're going to decide what we're going to do with all the material we came up with. Maybe we will release a special episode. Maybe it'll go on a special feed. Ours, Eastern Borders, I don't know. Maybe we'll do the Blade Runner version where we have multiple versions, multiple director's cuts out there, and you can choose the one you want. We'll let you know, though, what we do with it. So All right, so let's bring this to an end. That's all for today, folks. Thanks to listeners of both Dead Ideas and Eastern Border, and any new listeners out there.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute there.
Yes.
Good sir.
Yes.
Sir. I remember that we in the Eastern Border have this segment, Ask Uncle Joe.
Okay,
and you had a question for Uncle Joe.
Oh, yes. Yes, I get my question answered on air. Okay.
So, can you please repeat your question then?
Oh, I don't remember. Oh, okay, I remember what it was. Please, Mr. Stalin, in your opinion, what is the cutest animal?
Oh, well, but I can respond to this to you with ease. Come on. Stalin, for all of his life, only wear rider's boots. That means the horse is the best animal. Horse
Clearly.
does a lot of work. Horse always works very, very hard. Stalin wore rider's boots throughout his life and nothing else. Because, Lenin only wears shoes, but by Stalin's time the Soviet country was in the shit through the knees already, so he had to wear boots. And if you sit on a horse, then it's better that way.
So the horse is the cutest animal. Very nice. All right, thank you very much.
Also another thing, like, and I have to give you a Soviet joke here. Stalin and Molotov are like hunting, and the duck flies around. And Stalin shoots but misses. And Molotov is like, "Oh, how strange, Comrade Stalin! A dead duck is continuing to fly."
Very nice. All right.
Something.
All right. Well, we'll bring this to the close. We'll bring this to a close. All right. So, thank you to everybody who listened. Thank you, Kristaps, for being on the show. Thank you for having me on your show, mutually. And in the meantime, everybody, remember I said we were going to have a contest. So Dead Ideas is holding a kind of black humor kind of contest, voting on who should play Tito if there ever were to be a Hollywood movie version of his life. And whether Hollywood chooses to sanitize him by either making him totally heroic, like, Alexander the Great or something. Alexander the Great, the real guy, was a dick. But obviously he's been romanticized in Hollywood. So they could do that with Tito, or they could totally vilify him like some kind of Bond villain. Whichever they choose to do, who should play Tito? So listeners,
if you don't vote for me, then I know where you live.
Kristaps should play Tito. Listeners of both shows are welcome to vote. So all you have to do is go to Facebook or Twitter and vote by posting with the hashtag HollywoodTito. So hashtag Hollywood Tito and the name of the actor that you think should play Tito and anything else you want to throw in there. Then you get your name entered in a random drawing to win a free portrait in which I will draw you in the time period and culture of your choosing. I will make you look awesome, I promise. So, and go ahead and do that.
He tells the truth. His portraits of me and Alice are like really amazing, and thank you, man. It was just great.
Oh, thank you. It was a fun one to do. The winner of the contest will be announced September 17th on Dead Ideas, so be sure to vote before then. Also, you can support both our shows on Patreon. We are at www.patreon.com/deadideaspod. Kristaps, anything you want to say about your Patreon?
I am on patreon.com/the Eastern Border.
Excellent.
And for some reason, people have a hard time finding us through search. But that will not stop, true comrades.
I find it easier by going to your website and clicking on the Patreon link from there.
Yeah, I suppose so. That's the easy way. I'm on easternborder.lv, and if you guys haven't listened to me yet, I'm the crazy guy who was on Brandon's previous episodes, and I do Soviet history a lot, and Brandon does Dead Ideas, which is pretty self-explanatory, or not, but you'll have to check it out yourself. Yeah, what else is new? Come visit Latvia, honestly. You have a place to sleep on my couch. I'm always open to people, because lately I've found out that my post service loses about half of the stuff that I send abroad, which is terrible. I'm going to have to switch to like a higher costing, more expensive postal service. But yeah, come visit us on the Eastern Border. We live in Latvia, Riga, very east of European Union. So yeah, it's going to be great. And comrades, next episode we will deal with heavy subjects as usual, and more Stalin upcoming. But do give Brandon a listen on his Tito series.
I like how, so most podcasters will like have like a Patreon perk that's like, I'll send you a t-shirt or something, and you're like, you can come live with me.
No, they have the perks. I promise I'll send them stuff, but the thing is, like, today I found out that over 50% of what I send doesn't reach the address.
Yeah, that's not a good
And
percentage.
the thing is, if my post loses something that I can reproduce, like a t-shirt, that's okay.
Uh-huh.
But if they lose Soviet rubles or Communist Party pins,
Yeah.
they can't be reproduced, man. It's just lost
Yeah,
thing.
wasted effort.
Yeah, and so I'll have to figure something out.
Okay, so thanks everybody. I'm BT Newberg, and this is Dead Ideas.
До свидания, товарищи.
This podcast is part of the Dark Myths Collective. Visit darkmyths.org for more shows like this one. The darkness awaits. Thank you for listening to The Eastern Border. If you have any comments or specific details you'd like to know, you're welcome to leave it in the comment section on our site, theeasternborder.lv, and we'll rummage even to the western border to find you an answer. Like this podcast, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our RSS feed. Happiness is mandatory. Good reviews and donations feed the farmers of our kolkhozs in the great motherland. The Eastern Border salutes you.